finishing in the bottom half of their groups. Blue-White Heroic versus Jeskai Tokens. This is the third match in a row Joe has had against this archetype. He is 0-2 so far against the deck.
I think it is the most play-draw biased matchup in all of Standard because both these decks are so much more powerful on the offensive than they are on the defensive.
We see here both players at 12. Right now, Kevin Jones with Jeskai Ascendancy in play. Casting Raise the Alarm, pumping the team and looting. On resolution, he'll get 2 1/1s.
Another problematic card for Joe in this matchup is Secret of the Way. You see that Kevin has it there. Really, both of these decks' only recourse is racing one another. That's the only thing that they can do. Joe can't get Secret of the Way off the table, and so even if Joe has a good draw, Kevin can just kind of do his thing, incidentally gain some life with Secret of the Way, and win the damage race that way.
Yeah, and you say that life total, that life gain there swings Kevin from 12 back up to 16, gaining 4 off his Seeker of the Way. Just finishing his attack, he puts Joe down to 4 and has an army of blockers. So Joe's going to have to pretty much do the rest of the damage right here.
And I thought that week 1, week 2 of Standard, people were playing with too many copies of Secret of the Way because the games were all about just big stuff, Wingmate Rocks and Siege Rhinos. And I think Secret of the Way is a little out of place in that metagame. But the format has sped up so much and so many of these decks are about damage racing that I think that Secret of the Way has become much better over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, it really has come full circle where that life gain has gotten really relevant again. Post-combat, we have Treasure Cruise from Kevin, and he draws in to Stoke the Flames. With Joe at 4, that should be good enough, and we are on to game 2. Kevin Jones up 1-0.
It's been a tough day at the office for some of our White-Blue Heroic players. Tom Ross barely getting out, and now Joe Lossett also a game away from being eliminated.
So a little bit about Kevin Jones. This is our first time seeing him today. Our Season 4 winner really has been peaking at the right time for this tournament. One of the innovators of the Jeskai aggro deck. It has propelled him to an open victory in Edison, New Jersey, and he has taken it from there. A bunch of great finishes with Jeskai.
So he's a player where he was on the leaderboard for much of Season 1 and Season 2 without a lot of wins or top 8s on the Open Series or Invitationals. He was definitely one of our IQ grinders. Things flipped around a little bit for him in the fall, where he won the first Open in New Jersey, where Khans of Tarkir was legal for Standard, with a Jeskai aggro list, which there were some rough spots around the edges, like you would anticipate week 1 of a format, but still was a very influential deck for the Pro Tour and beyond. He also, soon thereafter, won the Legacy Championships during Eternal Weekend in Philadelphia. While not an event associated with Star City Games, still another impressive piece of the resume. So definitely turned it on in the second half of the season.
You see right now, hoping to make it into the Legacy rounds, he is up a game over Joe Lossett. For Lossett, the question was never Legacy. He is a veteran of Legacy, but whether or not he would be able to get to those rounds, and right now he has his back against the wall.
It's been tough. Joe has a pretty wide range. I think overall he errs towards playing control decks in Standard, much like he plays Miracles in Legacy, but he's mixed it up from here and there. We've seen him play Burn in an Invitational in the Standard portion. He's playing White-Blue Heroic here. So I think for Standard, he's much more of a metagame reader than in Legacy, where he just defaults towards playing Miracles most of the time.
Well, one of the things that he's done with his Standard game to get a lot of really good success is he's taken decks like Red-White Burn or like Blue-White Heroic, very linear style decks, and he's really just gone all in on mastering one archetype so that he can play one Standard deck reasonably well and then really dominate these invitational, these multi-format tournaments with his Legacy game.
I think it's a tough recipe because Standard is much more of a fluid metagame. I think you have to be more on the ball. I like that strategy much more for Legacy, where the format moves very slowly. And so if you master one deck, it's unlikely that the metagame is going to shift so radically that you're going to be punished for it. On top of that, Legacy is so complicated that expertise with a particular deck, I think, is worth more than having the best deck for a given weekend. That said, Joe Lossett has still had a ton of Standard success, 2 Standard Open wins. He's had a lot of success in Invitationals, which are multi-format. He's done a lot of damage on the IQ circuit. A lot of those are going to be Standard tournaments. So even though he has a Legacy resume, a Legacy reputation, definitely a skilled Standard player as well.
Yeah, I have to agree. He does have some 2 Standard Open victories, actually, in the last couple of years, so which is more than Legacy Open victories. He has plenty of Legacy top 8s, however.
It's the weird part about Joe's resume. Part of it is that he streams so much. He's known for that, and he plays the one deck. So people just say, yeah, Joe, the Miracle Master, our Legacy player, but has more Standard chops than I think the average person knows.
Yeah. certainly a lot of experience with the Miracles deck. On Kevin Jones' side, talked a little bit about his experience with Jeskai and other blue aggressive strategies.
Now, an interesting element of Kevin's deck list this weekend is Mantis Rider is in the main deck, and he is playing the Ascendancy build. But Mantis Rider has basically been cut from that deck. Kevin playing 3 copies this weekend.
Well, that goes back to this Jeskai aggro style deck. Remember, that was the deck that Kevin piloted. And as recent as 2 weeks ago, which is really the week after the World Championships, where the Jeskai tokens deck really came out in force, Kevin was still on just straight Jeskai aggro, sticking to his older deck. Now, he has gotten to the point where he's added Jeskai Ascendancy and Treasure Cruise to that deck. So he's jumped on the bandwagon halfway. He's still doing a lot of the things, like you said, Mantis Rider, that really are more like a Jeskai aggro deck.
And it makes some sense to me. I don't know where I ultimately stand on it, but I've heard a lot of people comment about the Ascendancy deck where if they don't have Jeskai Ascendancy, it's really hard to beat the green decks because those decks are so good at blocking. Rabble Master and Secret of the Way are unlikely to go unchecked, and it's trivial for that deck to handle a bunch of tokens because you have, of course, a Crew Fix and Siege Rhino. Your 1/1s are not worth very much. So giving you another line of play when you don't have Ascendancy, especially a Flyer, which is very good against the decks that are trying to block, makes some amount of sense to me.
Oh, we're about to be underway for game 2. And this is, as you mentioned, a very play-draw dependent matchup. Joe Lossett will be on the play for the second game.
These decks are so much better at attacking than blocking. Both of them. So being on the play is a big deal.
Yeah, and both decks really need to be attacking because when the game goes late enough, neither of them can really control the other one.
Yeah, so we're dealing with Thassa on Joe's side of the table, plus maybe some removal spells against Jeskai Ascendancy and the inevitability that provides. But
yeah, as you saw in that game, once Kevin gets 3 creatures in play with the Jeskai Ascendancy, his deck is able to close out the game very quickly from that point. Joe keeping on 7, Kevin down on a mulligan.
That's what a lot of people will tell you about the Ascendancy deck. When it has Ascendancy in play, it's favored against the entire field. When it does not have Ascendancy in play, then some of the other cards in other decks start to matter a little bit.
Yeah. And which is one of the reasons you see cards like Erase in Joe's sideboard. He has 2 copies of it as his ways to deal with Jeskai Ascendancy.
And it speaks a lot to the power of Ascendancy. It's almost regarded as a given that it's pretty bad to play a couple disenchants for a deck that has 4 enchantments in it. You know, we
Right.
figured out in 1997 that's not a good place to be at. But Ascendancy is so good that it's worth being stuck with a dead card sometimes to be able to answer it.
It's very hard to win a game when your opponent resolves an Ascendancy and gets to stick on the board. I mean, in this configuration of Jeskai tokens, the card is liable to deal 8 damage and draw 2 cards on the very next turn.
You know, do you bring in your 2 copies of Race against a deck that has 4 copies of Banishing Light as the only enchantments? Probably not.
Yeah, that probably not in the situation.
But against Ascendancy, yeah, you make those kind of sideboard concessions because if it goes unchecked, there's not a lot to be done.
All right. And we are underway. Joe Lossett on the play. We'll start with Flooded Strand into favored Hoplite, the preferred 1-drop for his deck. This guy's particularly relevant in the matchup as the general way that Kevin can deal with Joe's creatures is by either lightning striking them or gang blocking them. And that second half of the triggered ability on favored Hoplite, the prevention ability, is very relevant against both of those.
It's also just important for Joe to get out in front with multiple threats or the ability to protect a threat. So having something to do on turn 1 is very good because if Joe has nothing on 1 and then on turn 2 play something and Kevin has a lightning strike to deal with it, then you risk, if you're on Joe's side, your hand just getting cluttered with enchantments with nothing to be done.
Mana Confluence from Lossett, and it will be, looks like, an ordeal onto favored Hoplite. That'll grow to a 2/3 and then to a 3/4. Kevin will go down to 17, and more importantly, favored Hoplite will get out of range of the 2-mana Lightning Strike.
Kevin with 1 copy of Glare of Heresy in his sideboard. Joe's taking a big risk there. Kevin does not have it.
Doesn't have it. Just Mystic Monastery for Kevin. And now Joe gets to cash in his first ordeal and gets to decide whether or not he wants to play a second one and cash that in as well.
Or get a second threat on the table in Secret of the Way or something else. So just a really powerful opening here for Joe.
And that was that play draw you were talking about. A lot of these cards, like, you know, the Lightning Strike style cards, so variable in their effectiveness depending on whether or not you're on the player draw.
The red removal spells are always going to be a little tough to maximize against white-blue heroic because they can grow their creatures, they have God's Willing and so forth, but that is especially magnified when the red player's on the draw.
And Joe is going to double up on the ordeals. So he casts the second ordeal of Thassa, Unfavored Hoplite. That grows it with a third counter. The 2 attacks grow up to 5 counters, and there is a 6/7 hitting Kevin as early as turn 3.
Putting a lot of pressure on Kevin to have, say, a Jeskai Charm here, but even then, it's not really that bad for Joe.
Yeah, and it looks like Kevin's hand is actually triple Mantis Rider, which in a lot of games would be very powerful, but again, something like this heroic deck really doesn't pass the test.
I mean, if white-blue heroic has any sort of draw, and your draw is turn 1 tap land, turn 2 tap land, it's going to be hard to win on the draw, period.
Lightning Strike, the draw from Kevin. He'll cast Mantis Rider, drops to 10 to do it. Mantis Rider swings, puts Joe down to 14. And what Kevin, it looks like, is going to have to do is hope to get in enough damage to this Mantis Rider, followed up with some chump blocks on the favored Hoplite, and then Lightning Strike his way for the remainder of the points. But a lot of stuff could go wrong with that kind of plan.
A good barometer for how well is Jeskai tokens doing in a particular game is, could they take a turn off right now and cast Jeskai Ascendancy? If the answer is yes, they're probably in a pretty good spot. Right now, the answer is definitely no.
4th land from Joe still has a grip of 7 cards thanks to the 2 ordeals of Thassa that he cracked last turn. See Hushwing Griff among the cards in Joe's hand. That one a 2 of in his sideboard. And we will Joe cracking to get an island. See how he wants to keep the pressure on here. He can choose to leave up protection, or he can just make more creatures.
I like kind of splitting the difference here with a threat and a removal spell.
Looks like another ordeal for favored Hoplite. This one is going to be the Ordeal of Heliod. Gets the Hoplite's 6th counter. And actually the card is Glare of Heresy. That one's even worse for Kevin. Swing, the Hoplite will get a 7th counter. It's now an 8/9. Joe gains 10. Kevin drops to 2. And the idea of chumping and racing now becomes difficult as Kevin's going to have to chump with his only creature.
I do question using the Glare of Heresy on that turn rather than deploying another threat, because what's Kevin going to do? He can chump block there or not, and it doesn't really matter either way. You get a lot of life to play with, and you can just untap and glare the Mantis Rider the following turn. Probably doesn't matter too much at the end of the day, but...
Well, rather than making Mantis Rider, Kevin's going to go ahead and just pass. Joe attempts to swing for lethal. Here comes Raise the Alarm from Kevin, hoping to make a chump blocker. Will it stick? The answer looks to be yes. Do not believe Joe has the counterspell yet. You see in his hand multiple copies of Heliod's Pilgrim along with Seeker of the Way.
At this point, the only thing that Joe's got to be really that concerned with is Jeskai Charm or the Glare of Heresy. So I think whatever he's going to do is to try to hedge against those 2 cards.
Joe makes Seeker of the Way, which actually right now, keep in mind, is a lethal attacker.
And Kevin has drawn the Jeskai Charm, so that's sort of step 1, but not really, because Kevin's still in a ton of trouble.
Right, so step 1 is he probably wants to Jeskai Charm the favored Hoplite, and he probably needs to. And from there, then Kevin starts building up.
Although there is a problem with casting the Jeskai Charm in here is that you fall to 1 as well, then your pain land shut off. So even that isn't much of a reprieve.
Temple of Enlightenment, scrying to the bottom, swing with both creatures from Joe. It's going to be a chump on favored Hoplite and a Lightning Strike on Seeker of the Way. We'll see what Joe wants to do here. Thinking about casting Defiant Strike. That won't save the Seeker just yet.
It does give him the opportunity to potentially find another spell, in which case he's good.
Yeah. Defiant Strike will target favored Hoplite. Grow it again. He'll draw a card. And did he draw another Defiant Strike? He did. And that will be enough. Joe Lossett evens it up at 1 game apiece as the players move on to game 3.
This game 3 is going to determine the tournament for at least one of these people. Loser is done. The winner still with an opportunity to win the whole thing. And I mean, if Joe is able to get out of this, we then transition over to Legacy, where I'm sure he feels much more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a great thing for Joe to be able to move on to Legacy here. He's got to be looking forward to it if he can pull it off.
It's going to be tough to pull off, though. I mean, this is, like I said, I don't think this is a very good matchup for Joe to begin with, and winning on the draw is always hard.
Yeah, and he'll have to do that as Kevin will be on the play game 3. We see there that hand from Kevin, something like triple Mantis Rider, so much more powerful if you give Kevin the extra turn.
Yeah.
The same game plays out, except Joe's taking 3 every turn, and suddenly those lightning strikes in Kevin's hand may be enough to just win the race. All right, well, those players get ready for Game 3. Remember, this is the last event of the 2014 season, the 2014 Players Championship. But if you want to qualify for next year's, the trip to next year's Players Championship, that starts in 2015 and starts in January with our 2015 Open Series starting in Columbus, moving across the East Coast to Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and then we start our cross-country part into Indianapolis. You and Cedric are covering all 4 of those events.
Oh, we're covering a lot of them. We take a week off there for the regional championships. We have the locations posted for that over at StarCityGames.com the following weekend after Indianapolis, if you're curious. The Open Series then moves to Houston, Texas for the first time the following weekend, Los Angeles after that, then Baltimore for our first ever Modern Open, GP Miami the following week, and make sure to stay tuned for MagicGP.com for more information as we get a little bit closer to that event. Then we'll be in Dallas for a Standard Open, and then the Season 1 Invitational featuring a Standard Open Series and Standard and Legacy for the formats for the Invitational. Me, you, and Cedric will be running that one.
Yeah, that will be back in Richmond to end Season 1. And we are back here then. Game 3 about to be underway between the 2 players. And it does seem like there's an uphill battle here for Joe. You know, just that the advantage that Kevin has here to be able to get out early with even a card like Mantis Rider seems really important.
Both players are likely to, whoever wins the game, the loser is likely to have spells left in their hand. It's that kind of matchup. It more closely approximates a Legacy game in many respects, where it's about efficiency, it's about, you know, what's happening very fast, not this, you know, slow card advantage battle that we typically associate with standard decks.
Yeah, I really like how you said that the players always end the games with cards in their hand. They really are exhausting all their resources here.
And something, as an extension of that, players need to be very aggressive in mulliganing for specific hands.
Yeah, if you get the specific cards, there are a certain combination of cards, then the other ones in the hand aren't as important, which means maybe if you don't have them there at all, that's still acceptable.
For example, for Kevin, for an opening hand that only has something starting on the 3rd turn, that would be fine against a number of opponents. It's not okay here.
Right, Battlefield Forge started out with from Kevin Jones, and it's Tranquil Cove from Lossett. And second Pain land from Jones. Not sure if he has the 3rd land just yet. And it'll be Joe with the first creature on the board. It's favored Hoplite. Will Kevin take care of it? He does not Lightning Strike, but he does have Raise the Alarm, so he gets 2 of his own creatures onto the board.
But even this is a good sign here for Joe, because the match often comes down to damage racing, and Kevin opening up on Shivan Reef and Battlefield Forge means he's likely to take a lot of points of damage.
Right. I mean, unfortunately for Kevin, he hit a mountain on turn 3 there. He was stuck on 2. He'll just pass back the turn, but into 3 open mana, Joe's going to have to be a lot more careful.
Even still, it's a very Pain land heavy draw, and if Kevin takes too much damage off of his lands, even if he has an edge on the board, that's a recipe for Joe to steal it.
Well, we saw that earlier in the Tom Ross-Brad Nelson matchup. Brad was so careful with his life points when playing against this heroic deck, and for good reason. Every point counts here. There's not too much life gain on the side of the Jeskai deck, so it has to use that resource very carefully.
I mean, life points can equal turns in this matchup, so very important to be mindful of it.
Temple for Joe. Goes back to his hand. He has other creatures, Glare of Heresy. A lot of options available here. Looks like he will just pass the turn, and that means another Raise the Alarm from Kevin.
But no big deal here for Joe, as long as it doesn't come with an Ascendancy or a way to remove the Hoplite.
So what is the reason? So Joe had the option there of continuing to make more creatures on the board, but instead he's just playing into open mana. It's to protect the favored hoplite.
Yep. I mean, Kevin has to take a huge risk to be able to try to use a removal spell there because anything from Joe messes it all up.
Yeah, Kevin's removal is, a lot of it is damage based. Certainly that doesn't work against favored hoplite.
As long as Kevin doesn't have an ascendancy, assuming he doesn't find one of the creatures, Joe has a lot of time because his hands just burn spells. It's problematic for Kevin to go after Joe's creatures because he can play over the top of removal spells. If Kevin wants to try to start burning Joe out when he's at 21, that's fine. So Joe can afford to take a more conservative approach.
Fourth land from Jones, it is a third pain land. And then he plays that and passes back the turn as we move back to Lossett. Just favored hoplite staring down 4 soldier tokens. We'll see how he moves forward. And it looks like he's going to make Hero of Erois. So second creature here. Still leaving up 2 mana. Among cards in his hand, Glare of Heresy and Aqueous Form. And Aqueous Form looks like it's going to be the one. He's going to start trying to push some damage across. Does this get a response from Kevin? It looks like it does. It'll be Stoke the Flames targeting favored hoplite. This is in response to the aura.
Kevin kind of has to make a move here because Joe can start playing offense, defense otherwise.
Defiant Strike on favored hoplite. Joe trying to, insisting on Aqueous Form. Looks like Kevin does have a second copy of Stoke, and yeah, he's going to have to use it just to get rid of this 1/2. So both players expending a considerable amount of resources here. 2 Stokes on Kevin's side, an Aqueous Form, and a Defiant Strike on Joe's. But at the end, it is a 3-for-2 scored by Kevin, so does take care of a lot of Joe's action.
And now if he is able to remove this hero, he can really start attacking.
Temple of Epiphany from Kevin. Scries to the bottom. And he'll swing here. Does have Jeskai Charm if Joe chooses to block. He could pump his team and force that trade. We'll see if Joe wants to call him on it or just take the damage.
I think at 21, Joe's going to take the hit here. No reason to risk it.
And you're absolutely right. Joe down to 17 as we move back over to his turn. Kevin pausing on Joe's upkeep. No play there. Mana Confluence, the draw for Lossett. See his remaining hand. Glare of Heresy, Battlewise Hoplite, Heliod's Pilgrim, Mana Confluence.
And if Joe is able to maneuver this game into a spot where he can get Ordeal of Heliod online, that's really the prize here.
Yeah, and it's tough because those cards like God's Willing, Joe doesn't actually have any of them. So if he plays an aura, he's really exposing himself.
I mean, he can take a more conservative approach. The way the game's shaping up right now, Joe can still be patient. He has the opportunity just to play a 1/2. That warrants a response. You got to play something for your tokens to be freed up.
Yeah, Kevin's entire deck's board is 1/1, so 1/2 is actually pretty relevant right now.
And if Kevin wants to use a removal spell or a trick getting rid of a Heliod's Pilgrim, all right, so much the better. That's 1 down, and you're closer to be able to get something of substance onto one of your good creatures.
Ordeal of Thassa was the find from Heliod's Pilgrim. And he'll go ahead and go for Hero of Erois here. And Kevin holding on to the Jeskai Charm. Instead, he's just going to go ahead and erase the Ordeal of Thassa before Joe gets to attack with it.
I mean, Kevin might feel like his tokens just don't amount to much if he loses access to the Jeskai Charm.
Yeah, so Joe swings in for 3. Kevin's down to 11. Or yeah, it's just the Jeskai Charm right now in Kevin's hand. It's a source of damage, but it just isn't enough. Right now it's only 4, and Joe at a healthy 17. Kevin's going to need something like a Jeskai Ascendancy to give him that reach. Maybe a Goblin Rabble Master, something like that.
Yeah, right now, the game is really in Joe's favor. Kevin's pain lands are adding up a little bit. He's taking quite a bit of damage. Kevin with none of his power cards just yet. No Treasure Cruise, no Ascendancy, no Unchecked Rabble Master. And he's getting to a point now where he just has to use removal spells on mediocre things.
Kevin attacks for 4. Joe with no Joe, and he'll go ahead and Jeskai Charm to pump his team. Joe blocks one of them, so he'll lose the Heliod's Pilgrim. He'll take 6. Kevin will gain 8. That's very important right now.
But that's a spot where Joe doesn't mind calling, because the worst case scenario is he's without a Heliod's Pilgrim, and he doesn't really care too much about that.
Of all the Jeskai Charms I've seen cast, that was not one of the scarier ones. I think Joe's pretty happy to get that out of Kevin's hand for just that price.
For sure. I mean, it's not a bad exchange for Kevin either. He gets a lot of damage in, he gets a blocker out of the way, and so forth. But Joe was very patient in trying to get the board state to that point where if Kevin has a Jeskai Charm, it's not great for him, but it's not the end of the world.
Joe still got the 2-for-1 he was looking for. He traded his Ordeal of Thassa with an Erase and the Heliod's Pilgrim with a Jeskai Charm. So the Heliod's Pilgrim got 2 cards. See Joe now just flooding the board. Battle-wise Hoplite and Favored Hoplite join the board as Hero of Aroas continues to attack. Kevin back down to 14. So it's 14 to 11. Currently, Kevin at a higher life total, but Joe is making inroads.
And if Kevin's pumping the brakes here, it means his hand's probably pretty soft.
Yeah, Seeker of the Way was the play for Kevin on that turn. Card can be tricky for the Blue-White Heroic deck. What you saw in Game 1, where Kevin can just continue to gain life off it, and that's actually can be a problem for the Heroic deck.
I'm sure Joe wanted to clutch onto this Glare of Heresy and try to get Jeskai Ascendancy, even a Mana Strider, but Seeker of the Way is very threatening here as well.
Yeah, so he glares away the Seeker of the Way, and now we'll see how he wants to attack. He will have to offer up trades with these tokens.
Although, very risky for Kevin to block. There's opportunities here for Joe to kind of semi-bluff here.
Yeah, one trick gets Kevin really bad. And you see, Battle-wise Hoplite and Hero of Aroas, Joe's going to try to swing for 5. See, how does Kevin want to call this block?
I like this attack a lot from Joe because if he has something and Kevin makes a block, it's really, really bad for Kevin. He loses a ton. But if Joe has nothing and Kevin calls, okay, well, you get to trade your 3-3 with 3 tokens, and now your 2-2 and 1-2 is facing a 1-1. Or it happens the other way around, where you have a 3-3 against 2 tokens.
And for Jones, he has to decide just how much he can afford to play around a trick and how much he just has to play into one.
And also, what is he drawing to at this stage? Another question.
Yeah, if he loses too many tokens, Jeskai Ascendancy stops being a relevant draw. You see, he'll put 3 in front of, looks like he just takes. He can contemplate putting 3 in front of Battle-wise Hoplite, but ended up just going to 8. And now more creatures will join the fray. This is Hordling Outburst for 3 goblins.
This is an important draw for Kevin. Not that it helps too much on the board, although now he can be a little bit riskier on his blocks, but it gives him 2 different colors of blockers, which is really important if Joe tries to go for some sort of kill with Feat of Resistance or God's Willing.
Yeah, with 7 creatures in play, even just a Jeskai Charm or Jeskai Ascendancy at this point could be lethal from Kevin.
And if Joe has nothing, he might just have to say go.
Yeah, I don't know if Joe actually wants to trade Hero of Aroas with 3 of these tokens.
Well, the bigger risk is if you start trading your creatures for Kevin's tokens, and then Kevin finds removal spells, you might get to a point where you have nothing in play, and if you just start drawing creature enchantments and Kevin's drawing real cards, you might lose that way.
Well, I think Joe had an option. He either could swing nothing or everything, and he went with the aggressive line. He's going to swing everything here. That's a 3-3 Hero of Aroas, a 2-2 Battle-wise Hoplite, and the 1-2 Favored Hoplite. We move to see how Kevin blocks on it. It's going to be 3 on Favored Hoplite, 3 on Battle-wise Hoplite, 1 looks like on Hero of Aroas. And he declares them final. We'll see what Joe has, if anything.
This is one of those spots where Kevin has to block no matter what, because if Joe has nothing, he has to block, and if he has something, he also needs to block.
Defiant Strike on Favored Hoplite. That's going to be a big one. Favored Hoplite. All damage to it will be prevented this turn. Also, it gets up to 3 power, so it'll be taking down all 3 of those creature tokens. Right now, Kevin going to lose 6 of his 7 tokens without any more effects. And that'll be it. Battle-wise Hoplite trades with 2 goblins. Favored Hoplite takes down 3 soldiers. Hero takes down a soldier. And 11 to 8, Joe's ahead on life total, and I think finally is ahead on board as well.
That Defiant Strike was about the perfect card there for Joe, as it was a trick and a cantrip, and he needs action and things to target with.
Yeah, 6th land from Kevin Jones. That's not going to be much help. To Lossett. Now just looking at a 1-1 across the table. Here comes a 2-3 and a 3-3. He deals 2. Kevin goes down to 6. Kevin out of creatures now. Temple of Enlightenment from Joe ships a card to the bottom. And it looks like Kevin's remaining card, just a basic mountain. And Battle-Wise Hoplite from Lossett. And 2 more lands will be it. Joe Lossett with the comeback win, defeating Jeskai Tokens and Kevin Jones. It's his 3rd try in the matchup. He gets there, and 2-2 with his deck is good enough. He wins his elimination match and moves on to play Legacy.
You can see a big sigh of relief there from Joe. He commented a couple times to me about how stressed out he was at the event, during the event. These rounds are high-pressure matches for him, and able to escape and get to the Legacy portion. And not the easiest matchup to do it, and on the draw for Game 3. But Kevin, a little bit too much mana, never found any of his power cards in the matchup. Kind of just had some tokens, and Joe's able to outclass that.